Okay, so I think that's about it for the announcements. So I'm going to hand things over to the Cookbook crew. Brian, are you going to be leading?
I'll intro us
Great.
in and do all the transitions. Yep.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah,
you should be able to share your screen if you need to.
Yeah, I don't think I quite need to, but Robert, while I get things going, why don't you make sure you can share your screen because you're first, right? Just make sure you're ready. Okay, so yes, today we've got some slides put together and we're going to go over some of the stuff going on with the cookbook, what it is, how to use it, how to contribute to it, what the process is like. I'll just, the format will be Robert, who'll get about a 10 or 15 minute session, and then 5 minutes for questions, Trip, 10 or 15 questions, Glenn, 10 or 15 questions, Virginia will close us out, and then we'll have a Q&A, a longer Q&A session here at the end. So that's what to expect. So I will hand it over to Robert Castis to introduce himself and do his section. And I'll start the timer.
I'll unmute myself and then try again. Yeah, as I said, I'm from the Max Planck Institute for History of Science. I'm developer in different things, and I've been in the Cookbook group for a couple of months now. I mostly fell in when I had the idea of doing something about annotation collections. Been working with annotations with different forks in the past years or many years, and had this idea of doing something, but the specification didn't say very much and tools were non-existent. So I thought maybe one should write something about it, and then one can tell the tool developers to look at it, and also specification people can look at it. And that's how I came to the Cookbook group. The one recipe I wanted to make, I still haven't made, but I made some others around annotations, and I'll just quickly show you what the Cookbook is about for those who don't know it too well. So the IIIF Cookbook is publicly linked and now easier to find than ever on the IIIF webpage. So on the right-hand side under Get Started, you get to Cookbooks. Small footnote at this point that the list of the Cookbook page you get to right from the Get Started is slightly different than the one I'm showing now, which is the full list of cookbooks. I think we need to discuss maybe later what you think about it, having a separate starting cookbook site versus a full cookbook page. But yeah, in the past there was just the full cookbook page, so I'll just assume that it were there and show you, well, there is, the cookbook is of course full of recipes. That's what it's about. You find the public list of recipes, as I said, on the public website, like you see here. It's under different headings, and also there's different things about when it's about a particular attribute and other things. And the cookbooks, the recipes themselves, so the whole cookbook process works on a GitHub repository, and you will also hear more about later how exactly that works. So this is just the public side of it. And when you go into a recipe, the recipes have a fixed structure, skeleton, so to say. It always starts out with a use case, trying to describe what your problem is and what you want to achieve. Then there's the implementation note talking about the technical details, what it's about, and what the specification says. Then, if applicable, there's something about restrictions, so what you should look out for if you try to implement it. And then there's a natural language description of the example. And then there's always a full manifest or two, depending on the recipe, that shows what it's about. And often also a link, a working link to an embedded viewer, so for Mirador or UV, so you can immediately try out what it looks like in a viewer. The recipe workflow, how a recipe is created, it's very simple. You see it here. I mean, don't run away, please. The idea is that there's different ways to come about. You can look at the GitHub pages at all the issues, or you can come to the Slack channel on #Cookbook. During the process, there's different reviews. There's a Cookbook editors meeting and the authors meeting. So you can write something, discuss it with us, push it upstream so that there's a draft version you can look at what the formatting looks like. And if you're happy with that, it can go to review. So it's first reviewed by a group of Cookbook editors. And yeah, the review process can then also involve additional changes and updates. And then, as Glenn mentioned, there's also a review by the Technical Review Committee, the TRC. And when that's finally approved, it goes public and turns up on the list that you saw on the public website. Latest news, so far we have, at least when I last counted, there were 39 online recipes on the public website. Latest things during the last year, for example, 21 new ones have been accepted by the TRC. On GitHub, there's currently 77 open issues, which are not all, but many of them are ideas for new recipes. And what's new is, of course, the new and astonishing IIIF viewer support matrix. So if you go, it's also linked on the recipe page. If you go to that site, you see a list of recipes, and if they are, or the thing the recipe talks about, the feature it talks about, when that's applicable, whether it is supported in any of the viewers. Currently, there's a Mirador and UUV. And the level of support that's indicated is either yes, it's supported, no, it's not supported, or it's partially supported, which of course, at least at that point, it means you should read the recipe to find out what exactly that means. And what's nice about this is that Glenn has done a lot of work behind the scenes so that this list is automatically generated from metadata in each recipe. So as soon as a new recipe is created, it can automatically show up in this list. And also when something changes, for example, if a viewer gains support for a special feature, then that can be updated in the recipe, and this list will automatically update with it. Yeah, what are people using the cookbook for? For example, yeah, if you're interested in IIIF in general, and you could, for example, if you don't like reading the spec as such, you can look at the recipes to find out if there's something that you're particularly interested in, and from that, then learn about the specific parts from the specification, or just take the example and run with it. Cookbooks can also, recipes can be used in training. I mean, as Glenn has used them many times for his training sessions. They can, of course, be used when you're a software developer developing your client and have a question of how exactly is that meant to work, or what do I have to look out for when I implement that feature. And another rather newly presented feature is idea is because every recipe comes with a static manifest that is fully functional, you can use all these manifests also for automated unit testing, so that when you develop your software, it can automatically check that the recipe you know should work still works. Or you can even use that for other, use the manifests for other kinds of uses you have when developing. Yeah, another softer point is that recipes can, of course, also be used to discuss and develop community norms, as we said here, run to specifications to say, well, why did the specification say you can do thumbnails in this and this and that way? What's the behinds and what's the things you should maybe first try to do rather than something else? And yeah, the other idea also is that while writing a recipe or when presenting it, it can also show that, yeah, maybe something about the specification is not clear, or maybe there's use cases that are not yet covered by the specification. And I think that is also something that recipes can be about. And yeah, if you have questions on that, then please do that now. Otherwise, the next thing will be to talk about what's in and what's out by trip.
Should we be able to hear
Here we
you?
go. I figured it out. I unmuted. I figured it out. All right. Thanks, Robert. So we're going to leave it open here for a couple minutes for questions. I think there's a few enough of us that if you have one, you can speak up. But if we all start trying to talk over each other, then I'm going to make you do the raise hand. So does anyone have any questions or comments? Regis Revenue, he had one in chat already that said a color coding might be nice, like red and green and orange. It's not a terrible idea.
Oh, you mean for the
The viewer matrix. Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
For supported, not supported, impartial. Not a bad idea. Does anyone else have a question or comments about anything we just saw?
This is maybe a leading question because I know the answer, but it might be interesting. Glenn, or I guess I'll put this to you, Glenn, but anybody can answer. Like, what about cases where, I mean, this is the matrix is actually super useful for generalized viewers like UV and Mirador, but are there any like cases of, you know, like there might be a recipe that has a very specific case, right, where certain viewers might support that one thing, or, you know, custom viewers or something like that. Is there a way, is there plans for that in that matrix view, anything like that?
So yes, we've set the bar for what viewers are included quite low, on purposely low, really, to be able to include as many viewers as we can in the list. It needs to be support at least one of the recipes so that we can include it in one of the links and the matrix. And also it's got to be hosted, available on the internet so that we can link into it. So we don't host the Universal Viewer or Mirador, we kind of point to public versions. And as long as it hits those two things, then we would include it in the cookbook. So if there was a particular viewer that was particularly focused on AV, there's a couple in that view matrix that we haven't included. And that's mainly because they don't have the public interface that we can link into. They do support some of the recipes and we'd love to add them in. It's the Europeana viewer and also the other viewer, which I can't remember the name of, which is on the list. But hopefully we'd like to include them if there was a public link we can link into them. So we have set it to a low bar and we would include other viewers if they are available.
Thanks, Glenn.
The React AV viewer, that was it.
Every now and then we jump around to like Netfly and Heroku demos of people who've done stuff with their viewers to see, you know, the support working there that we're looking for, but it's not public. And it's like, yeah, I'm guilty too. I've developed a custom Mirador sort of in the past to do special things. It's just not good enough to actually have like out and publicized. Just got a couple minutes. Do you have anything else you'd like to comment on or say? We'll give you a second to think. I think we had a couple of newcomers today that said, I'm just trying to get deeper. I'm just trying to get more involved. I'm just trying to see what IIIF is like. Those simple recipes, just kind of going down and looking at the manifests even before reading the words kind of really just helps you. Okay, this is the pattern. This is what it looks like over and over again. It's the same digital object. You just change this line and that line to do this and that. That'll really kind of get you warmed up to what we're doing. And I know in the cookbook we try real hard to do a use case that's clear and useful and it makes sense. So usually it's tied to something like some sort of real world object or some sort of real world goal that's understandable. Okay, that was good. We hit about the 15-minute mark, even with questions on that one. This is right about the time Trip would start. So here's your last chance. If you have a question or comment, otherwise we'll move on. Okay. All right, Trip, why don't you take us into talking a little bit about the scope? You are muted. You are muted. Yep. It's tough.
That's all right. I was just talking to myself about rearranging some things on my screen. So you missed absolutely nothing. Right. So exactly. So as I said, I'm the technical lead for special collections at the Yale University Library. My work with IIIF here at the library is pretty much the cookbook, though some of my work does intersect with how we do use IIIF in our digital collection system. But I'm not core to that. So it fits for me to be in the cookbook. I've been a cookbook user in other let's call it venues a lot in the past, learning how to code with this or that language. Cookbooks have been incredibly helpful to me, besides actually liking cookbooks that are less metaphorical and actually about cooking food. So one of the things that's foremost for me is trying to make this thing useful. And some of this is a little facile, but I just want to spell it out anyway. It's great. Everybody on the team is on board with this. We have had very few discussions about scope, frankly. They tend to be fairly minor, and we tend to come to agreements fairly quickly. It's nice. It's a steep hill in its own way already to contemplate and start making these recipes and anticipate maintaining them. We're starting to see a new version rather of universal viewers starting to take a little hold. And at some point we're going to have to migrate our examples to think about that. So we don't want to make a cookbook that is a map the size of the world. We want to make a cookbook that's fairly tightly defined, so that we can have lower accretion problems and more clarity and utility for everybody. So I'm going to just basically go through what's out and what's in. I'm going to talk about what's out first, in part because there are unlimited ways that people learn, an unlimited amount of guidance people might want from IIIF. So I'm going to start by saying what's outside and don't talk about what's inside. And we can argue later about what's in the gray area. So one big heading, bespoke use of IIIF. If any particular institution or organization or even individuals implementation of the presentation API, it's not really what recipes are for. If there is local nuance to what people need to do, we expect people are going to make that nuance change locally and keep their own run books or playbooks, sharing things out to the community that you solved. That there may well be somebody else who has that, but we're not looking to address those too much in the recipes. If you want to do something with IIIF more broadly that's just wildly innovative and can be done, or you can do it at least, again, on you to execute. We hope very much that you'll share that back on the Slack, in your blog, at one of the semi-annual meetings, to just name 3 of the vectors. If there's something that the APIs do not, well, the presentation API does not do, and somebody wants to extend it to do that, that's great. The recipes are not the place to start with that stuff. Eventually, recipes are places to talk about extensions. But so essentially for all of these 3 things, there is the GitHub IIIF stories repository, and that's a place to put at least some things. You have to, of course, read the README first, but to at least contemplate putting something that's not in scope for the cookbook in these ways. Extensions, which in some ways is just an expansion of that last point, but it's an amendment as opposed to a core change in the API. One that actually has already happened is geodata. We have a nav place recipe now, and that's but before there is that extension, if there is medium specific data, we're not going to write a recipe for that yet. In parallel, if there's an object type that's not envisioned in the API, we're not going to do a recipe about that. 3D is underway. I don't know, I would speculate, I don't know, if somebody's collecting projected holograms, there's no contemplation in the presentation API for how you would represent a projected hologram in a manifest. So we're not going to write a recipe for that yet. But there is a IIIF TSG process for that. This is just in the main website. I scrolled up, there we go. Technical specification groups. So there's a whole text here about how to form them and how to move forward with them. And again, example 3D has its own TSG at this point. And then a little bit, as I think was alluded to earlier, we're not writing recipes for viewer-specific interpretations or hacks. If one viewer implements something about the presentation API one way and another viewer implements it a different way, well, presumably that's going to show up when we link out to those viewers. And we're not going to do a lot of contemplation of that in the recipes, and we're certainly not going to write a recipe that says, for this viewer, you need to do it this way, and for this viewer, you need to do it this way. Likewise, even more bespoke client implementations, if you write a really great aggregator or other sort of discovery engine for your institution, wonderful. Those are really super cool things. Bring them to the Slack, bring them to the semi-annual meetings. If a community grows up around them, great, so that starts to be a little bit more of a gray area, how a cookbook interacts with something that has a defined and established user community within the IIIF world, but that'll be a bridge that we cross when we get to it. So for anything having to do with an existing viewer, the thing to do is to use their community or organization practices. Let me just check the Slack, making sure that, yes, exactly, not until after the extension. Let's see, right, so that's one way of talking about what's out. So what's in? We aim first to talk about common and shared use cases. There may be some future in which there are recipes for edge cases, but that are still very much not out from the previous slide. But for the foreseeable future, we're talking about common and highly desired cases. As one example, AV captioning and transcribing, common and shared, and as it turned out, very arguable. The first pass we had at some recipes around this, there was a decent amount of argument, good argument at the TRC about them. And so now we have a meta recipe that talks about the concepts of captioning and transcribing. And we also have individual recipes for implementing specific things, achieving particular goals. Presentation 3.0 API lacunae or ambiguity. An example of this is annotating with a non-rectangular polygon. I didn't link to that one. That's easy enough to do. So with this one, there had been some discursive text in the 2.1 API that talked about, where to go, that serves this paragraph here, that talked about the target and how to make a bounding box for a non-rectangular polygon in your annotation. That text fell away from the 3.0 API to focus it a little tighter on just the shoulds and musts and mays of the standard. So we took the text from that and incorporated it into the recipe to address what is effectively a lacuna in the API, at least in some sense, to describe what the further details of this implementation are. We also deal with relationships to other standards in the recipe for linking to structured metadata, also known as the C also property. We have in our implementation notes some conversation about data types In the recipes on annotation, we make reference out to the web annotation data model and talk about what the squish is there between the two, and talk about what is specifically IIIF and what is just being incorporated by reference. And if you really want to understand it, go over here and read all of that. And then finally, what's in our what are getting called implementation notes, we've got, I'll admit, a little bit of inconsistency in vocabulary in the cookbook right now. Please feel free to call that kind of thing out in an issue in the cookbook repository. And an example here is thumbnails. There are many ways to do thumbnails. So what we wrote was an implementation note that discusses some of these ways and gives guidance on how to implement them, with some stress though, and this is where it differs from the meta recipe that I was talking about earlier. This one, an implementation note, puts some stress on, gives some guidance on how IIIF as an organization and the cookbook as a proxy for that are the more nearly optimized ways, or the more nearly optimized parts. Maybe optimal is a better word there, but the parts of these implementations that are more nearly optimal. In other words, the cookbook is from time to time opinionated, and that's something that is in spec, is to write those opinions into a recipe. I think that's substantially what I had to say. I don't know why I'm looking around my computer like there's some magic bubble that's going to pop up and tell me what else I wanted to say. So maybe, I guess, my questions as a way of framing thoughts, though all comments and questions are welcome, is what does this structure leave unclear? You know, what are the gray areas between in and out that you can think of? What are the in-between use cases? And of course, any other comments or questions?
Thanks, Trip. Yep, like you said, we got a few minutes here for questions. So same deal. If you want to have one, just speak up. Yeah, the gray area is fun. We kind of get stuck between, you know, what's optimization, what's best practice, what's to the letter. That's sort of where the opinions come into play. In particular, that thumbnail one was amazing to follow. That was, I've never spent so much time talking about thumbnails. Oh my God.
Right, and as mentioned in the chat, not having a recipe for an unwritten extension doesn't mean you can't theorize it and start working on it, but it's not going to get published in the cookbook. That might be not exactly a hair to split, but that might be a detail worth noting. That we will take volunteers to undertake, let's put it that way, recipes in advance of things getting published.
That was part of the fun. Sometimes you have an idea you think can be a recipe, and then you get in it and you go, boy, I need to change the presentation API in this way to make it happen. And then it's like, oh yeah, we're writing an API extension.
Yeah, I think the way that the nav place recipe kind of evolved, I know you started it before the extension was published, and that was really helpful, I think, in informing how the extension was going to work. And it's kind of a bit of a pair process. I think it worked really well. I wonder if I can just add one of these gray areas and call them some of the Mirador folks. But one thing we have been asked about is whether we'd put kind of Mirador configuration recipes into the cookbook. And we've kind of held back and said that that's probably something that lives on the Mirador site rather than the IIIF cookbook. I just wonder if there's any comment on that, whether you disagree or whether you agree with that.
I mean, I would like to think that maybe if somebody wants to write one, maybe we could use the cookbook process, or maybe even the cookbook repository, but then post it somewhere on the Mirador site like that. Because I think the feedback from the recipes or the recipe authors group at least has helped me think about how to make a good example, how to make something easy. And I think that would also be maybe helpful for people wanting to have something about viewers or Mirador specific.
I think we'd love to host examples of Mirador configurations like in Mirador land on our demo site. I think that's something we're willing to do. We just haven't really had the bandwidth. And I agree that keeping it out of the cookbook makes sense.
And can I add that, like, I really like the idea of any viewer, not just Mirador, handling that. And like maybe on the demo site, the viewer developers think about, hey, this configuration or the link from the cookbook links to something that sort of spins up the configuration that the user can then view from their end. Because they're going to see it on the interface side, but they also maybe would want to see what the config looks like for the specific viewer. I'm not sure that, I mean, obviously capacity, but I could see that being a viewer responsibility.
Yeah, I think specifically, viewer, options to build the right looking viewer is a tough one to put in the cookbook. I think the cookbook is more connected to like presentation API. Presentation API works, way X, and if the viewer doesn't supply the UX for that particular idea, it's not the technical recipe's fault. So it's tough to get into the technical recipes just because of viewer. We think we should do it to the spec, to the API spec, and viewers should support the API spec, right? So that's the wall we share is presentation 3 API. So that's why I find it tough to do, Mirador configs and UV configs in the cookbook. I will say, since we brought this up so much, the two spaces for these gray areas that I found are like IIIF Commons and the IIIF Guides, and I put those in there. Just super fast on them. The Commons is like a place to put in shared components. So like if you design a plugin for Mirador, do something real special for Mirador, you can sort of turn it into a common shareable piece and host it on Commons. And then Guides is sort of like, yeah, you see the manifest and how you're supposed to make it, but how do you get that into the viewer, right? And a guide would be, here's how you take your completed manifest and get it into the viewer to show it, right? That also wouldn't be a recipe. So I think Commons and Guides, if we can sort of start to figure out, put them into use and start to figure them out a little more, I think more blog post style, this is how you do this. That'll be more the space for that kind of stuff. Okay, then we got another minute or so if you want to ask another question. Otherwise, we'll move forward here. Okay, well, Glenn, make sure you can share your screen. I think your part's next. So that was a little bit about scope, and now Glenn's going to get into some more about the future and some of the more brass tacks ways to be involved.
Thank you, Brian. So I know Virginia's going to cover this next, but I'm just going to do a quick plug to join the Cookbook group. They're a really great group to work with. And it's a really nice way of kind of learning some of the different parts of the specification that maybe you haven't come across. When you get a recipe, it's really useful. You have to really investigate how it works and maybe find examples. And I'll go through how we could get some help with that. But I'm going to talk about the kind of the future direction of the cookbook and also where we'd like to get some input on where we turn to next with recipes. But I'm just going to start with looking at where we are, and I'm going to start with the viewer matrix. So as I mentioned, this is the stuff about which viewers are included, and these are the reasons that we include them. At the moment, we're using Mirador 3 and UV version 3. But if there are other viewers that hit this criteria, we'd be more than happy to include them in the cookbook. And then in the viewer matrix, just to kind of give you an overview of where we are, there's 6 basic recipes. So these are looking at how do I do an image file, how do I do an audio file, how do I do a video file, looking at a book, like internationalization and kind of simple recipes like that. So there's 6 of those. There's 15 recipes on properties. So these things like metadata, the right statement, label, summary, embedding HTML, lots of really practical examples in that. We've got 3 structures, so looking at table contents, both with images and also with AV content. Got a number of image recipes. I should say that the numbers I'm quoting, some of these are appearing in multiple lists, so it looks like there's more recipes than there are, but there are still quite a number. But just to pick out a few, so the AV recipes, we've got 11 in total. It's interesting seeing the coverage. Mirador and UV are quite almost parity in a lot of the different recipes, with the UV maybe slightly edging ahead in some of the AV recipes, but it's certainly not by much. So this covers things that you heard before, transcriptions, also being able to play back at the start at a particular point. And then we've got a couple of 3 annotation recipes, and there are another 2 that are going through the TRC review process. So we just started, that was our kind of main focus up until Christmas, was looking at annotation recipes. And now we've got the 5 basic recipes. We're going to be adding a couple more. And then we've got content specific recipes. So you've heard about the nav place recipe, which is coming, but there is this annotation geo recipe that came earlier, and has also got a newspaper example. So we've got some kind of content specific recipes. The recipes in the pipeline. So the first, and this kind of gives you an indication of where we get the kind of priority of which recipes to choose to target. I should say the annotations kind of came from the Mirador group. So they were interested in seeing annotations being more specified. So that's why we kind of turned to annotations before Christmas. And now we've kind of got those basic 5. We're kind of at a point where we can choose to readjust our focus if it's necessary. But to give you an idea of what's coming, so the first one is rotating a IIIF image onto a canvas. And just to give you an example of what this looks like, this is something I've wanted to be able to do in IIIF a long time. When you've digitized a manuscript and you've published it as IIIF, and you realize one of the images are upside down, wouldn't it be nice if you could just flip that the right way around without having to re-ingest and rescan the photo? And so this is possible in IIIF, and it has been since IIIF version 2, but it's not something that's been supported by any other viewers. So Trip is working on this recipe, and it's one that comes up in the training sessions all the time. People want to kind of rotate an image, or even do a portion of an image as the IIIF canvas. And so we're going to implement that recipe and then test it out on the viewers. The next 2, nav place, which is a new extension we've talked about, on a canvas and a manifest. And this is Virginia and I forgot his name. The other co-chair of the maps group.
Elliot, yeah, Elliot picked it up now. Yeah,
Elliot, oh great, are working on these. And this is kind of, so the extension's gone out, and now we're going to see some recipes showing how it's used, and that's come from the maps group. And then image choice and layers. So this was originally from the original list of cookbooks, and it's kind of one of the powerful features of IIIF, is being able to do this layering of images, either through X-ray or from images coming from different places. So that's another one which is underway. And the question we've got now really is, where should we focus once we've completed these recipes? Is there a big part of the IIIF cookbook which is missing, or the bits that you are really desperate to see and that you'd like us to have a look at? So that's what we're looking at in this section. The way we've kind of been managing the list of recipes is through this GitHub issue list. And a big thanks to Dawn Childress, who's been through these issues and cleaned them up. We haven't been keeping a good close eye on these lists of issues, but Dawn's cleaned them up, and we're going to start looking at them every week in our meeting to try and get a better handle on the list of issues. But there are 77 recipes that are open. There are more issues in total, I believe, but I think 77 are ones that we've identified as recipe issues. There are 9 real world objects, so geo ones, archive ones, newspapers, museum ones, and things like that. We've got 23 audiovisual recipes to be written, 16 on annotation, and 7 on implementation notes. And the opportunities really is to try and give us a clear steer about which ones we should kind of focus on. And I think this can be done in 3 ways. The first way is to fill out the issues with your use cases. So some of the issues, and I'll give an example in a sec, are very ambiguous and probably don't show the excitement involved in the recipe. And if you have this use case, it'd be great if you could link out on the issue to maybe an example where you've implemented it, or just talk about the use case you have that matches this recipe. Sometimes half of the trouble of writing the recipe is thinking of a good use case or a good practical example of this item. Also comment on recipes you'd like to see. So as we're going through these issues, if we're seeing that lots of people are commenting on a particular issue, that's going to be a clear steer to us that that's really important to you. And then finally, if you've got the time and the interest, we'd love more volunteers to write or even help write a recipe. So maybe be the person that can tell the recipe author about the use case and kind of help steer it through the process. So keep those 3 in mind, and I'll talk about some practical examples of this. So we discussed this linking with a hotspot recipe in our last IIIF authors call, and it's a bit of an obscure ticket, and it had an even obscurer title before we fixed that in the last meeting. But this really kind of hides a really powerful feature of IIIF, but you wouldn't know this by looking through the issue. And just to give you an example, this is an implementation of it that Digerati has worked on for a place in Ireland, which I forgot the name of. Galway, thank you. So this is for Galway, and it's a great way of viewing a manuscript, and you can see that they've got these hotspot links, these links here on top of the items. And when you click on that hotspot link, it will take you to another part of their collection which relates to this name or person or place. And it's a really powerful feature of IIIF. Another one that isn't kind of more generally implemented in viewers, but it would be great to add this use case to that issue so that when we pick it up in the author's call, you're able to kind of better understand what that means. Linking with a hotspot just doesn't really cut it as an example, and it's much better if we can have a practical example like this when we start tackling the issue. And then also comment on recipes you would like to see. So I've deliberately chosen this one because this is one I would love to see, an archival collection in IIIF. So if we're seeing that lots of people are putting +1, so thumbs up or direct comments into the recipe to say, I'd really like to see this, then that'll give us a kind of hint that it's a recipe we should look at. This one in particular, we would love to see, I would love to see. So if you are interested, please do comment on this. There's a link in the slides, and I think we've linked the slides from the agenda. If not, we can do at the end to say that you're interested in this. And then the final way to help is to volunteer to write or help write a recipe. This is a recipe that's come up with lots of comments and looks like a really useful recipe to write. It's about in Mark 21 cataloging, how do you link to a IIIF manifest? And there is quite a long discussion about the best way to do this. And what we really need is somebody with expertise that can just say, yes, I think this is the way to do it, and to volunteer to write the recipe. It should be one of the more simpler ones in that it's not complicated IIIF. It's kind of saying if you're cataloging in a MARC record, this is a recommendation of linking to a IIIF manifest. And this is an example of something that Trip mentioned about working with other standards. And this is one of the kind of features of the cookbook, that you can talk about the other standards and how you link between IIIF and this other standard and back and forth. So if there are volunteers, just let us know, comment on the recipe, and we can help you through the process of writing this recipe. So I'm going to stop there and leave you with some homework, and then prompt maybe some discussion now. The homework is to fill out the issues with your use cases. If you look through those cookbook issues, you see one that looks interesting, and you think, I'm already doing that, maybe in IIIF presentation 2 or not even in IIIF, but you'd like to see it in IIIF, put that into the issues so we can, it will help write the recipes. Comment on recipes that you'd like to see, particularly the archives one, if I can make any hints. And then also volunteer to write or help write a recipe if there's something you feel passionate about, or it's something that you're keen to see. We'd welcome more authors. And then to discuss now, just take a quick kind of temperature of the community. What recipes would you like to see? Which areas should we focus on? So AV, annotations, is there something else? And how else could we make the recipes more useful? I think we would like to hear, especially from viewer developers, so both the Mirador and the UV community and other viewers, if there are areas of work that you're maybe have got on your timescale in the next 6 months, if you could give us a heads up, we might be able to create some recipes to kind of help make that development easier. But the wider question, are there the recipes that you'd like to see or areas we should focus on?
Glenn, if you want to let me share my screen, I will go ahead and do one live time for you real quick. So I'm at the call here and I'm like, oh yeah, I heard him talking about that hotspot one. I work with IIIF Maps, so I know IIIF Maps is interested in that. So to let Glenn know that, I go to the issue. See here, I know it's not all filled out, but I know IIIF Maps wants to see this. +1, leave your comment. And then that's kind of stuff's really easy for us to track and count. And so it's just that easy to go in and say, hey, yeah, I do support that one. Let's do it. That's all. Nice and quick and easy.
But not the archives one, I noticed.
No, not yet. No, you know, I have my interests. All right.
That's fair enough.
So as a second voice, I really do want to see more ones on annotation, just because of how widely used that web annotation is for so many of these solutions. The more annotation ones I think we have, the better. And I will warn you, we only have 2 or 3 minutes. So if you do want to say something, speak up.
I'm just going to say a big thank you to Toby, and I'm going to send some IIIF stickers for putting the +1 on the archival one.
Okay, we're getting mostly silence. I'm starting to think maybe no one has a question or a comment. I'll just kind of close us off here and let Meg or Glenn or Josh say anything very IIIF focused to close.
I think we've got Virginia next, actually.
Oh my gosh, we missed a whole section. Oh my gosh, Virginia, you better get
It's
going.
very short anyway. I only have a couple of slides and it's just reiterating what has been said already. So
Yes,
very quickly go through it. And again, it's the saying that, yeah, we're looking for more volunteers and that it should not be scary to get started. And as Glenn was saying, if you see something that really catches your attention, especially those 2 recipes, or if you want to volunteer for anything, or if you have an example that's something you haven't seen, then you have the potential to become an author. And you don't need to be an expert on the case, and you don't need to be a very technical person. And that's how I got started on the Maps group. I'm one of the least technical co-chairs, and this is one of the ways that I can contribute with the recipes. And the main points would be, as it has been said, it's just turning the case into a concrete example and clarifying the possibilities through that example, and then making a list of steps that will ensure consistent results in the end. So how do you become an author? It's from the website, as Robert was saying. The landing page takes you to how to get started, and there are links to the Slack channel, and we have weekly meetings. And if you're interested, we can always pair you with someone that is more experienced that will help you through the process. And that's it. So now there's another Q&A. That's all of it.
The 1 minute Q&A. It's a good thing we left time for questions after each section. So yes, I will just second what she said. Please get involved. Don't be afraid to go put in an issue. Don't be afraid to ask to be assigned to something. Some of us who've been around more do tend to mentor someone sort of in the beginning. So it's really not that scary. It's just knowing how to connect up your Git and, oh, I got to commit it in and push it. And that's the scary part for people who aren't used to coding. But it's not really like coding, right? You're writing Markdown. So most of it, you're still just typing paragraphs.
All right, thank you all. That was really wonderful. And again, I encourage anyone who's interested to reach out to the Cookbook group if you would like to get involved. So we are about a minute over time. So I'm going to end the call. Thanks all for attending. Thanks to all the presenters. I really appreciate your joining us. And we will see you all hopefully next month for our next community call. Hope you all have a great day. And I will add the recording URL to the notes document, just so we have that if anyone would like to go back and check anything out or share it or anything. So thanks all, and we'll see you next month. Bye.
Thanks all.